Picture a medieval pilgrim who has travelled 500 miles on foot, finally kneeling before a golden reliquary containing what they believe to be the finger bone of a saint, tears streaming down their face as they pray for a miracle that might save their dying child. So, sit back, grab a cup of tea, and get ready to explore how medieval Europeans travelled thousands of miles to touch fragments of holy bones. We'll discover why saints' relics became the most valuable commodities in Christendom, examine how miracles, money and faith intersected at shrines across Europe, and learn what authentication methods, pilgrimage economics, artistic reliquaries, and the surprisingly sophisticated business of sacred remains tell us about a world where heaven and earth met in fragments of bone and drops of blood. They were the treasures that launched 1,000 journeys, a splinter of the true cross, the skull of John the Baptist, the breast milk of the Virgin Mary, the bones of apostles and martyrs. To modern eyes, the medieval obsession with relics, physical remains or possessions of saints, might seem morbid, superstitious, even ghoulish. But for medieval Christians, these fragments represented something profound, tangible connections to heaven, physical proof of spiritual reality, and conduits for divine power to flow into the material world. In an age before photographs or recordings, relics made the sacred immediate and touchable. They collapsed the distance between earth and heaven, between the living and the holy dead. The word relic comes from the Latin reliquiae, meaning remains or leftovers. But these were no ordinary remains. They were, in the medieval understanding, still animated by the holy power that had filled the saint in life. Death didn't diminish this power, it concentrated and purified it. A saint's bone wasn't a dead thing, but a living channel of grace. This wasn't metaphorical, but believed to be physically, measurably real. Miracles at shrines weren't hoped for. They were expected, documented, and verified. The medieval world was one where the supernatural regularly broke through into daily life, and relics were the most reliable points of contact. Understanding the medieval relic cult requires grasping a fundamental difference in worldview. Medieval Christians inhabited a universe where the boundary between material and spiritual was permeable. Saints weren't distant historical figures, but active presences. They appeared in visions, intervened in battles, healed diseases, and punished wrongdoers. Their bodies, even fragmented and distributed, remained unified with their souls in heaven. Touch a saint's bone, and you touched the saint. Pray before their relics, and they heard you directly. This wasn't primitive thinking, but sophisticated theology worked out by the greatest minds of the age. The classification of relics followed precise hierarchies. First-class relics were the most precious, actual body parts of saints. These ranged from major relics like entire bodies or heads to tiny fragments, a tooth, a finger joint, a splinter of bone. The authenticating documents often specified exactly which part of the holy anatomy was present. Second-class relics consisted of items intimately associated with the saint, clothing they wore, instruments of their martyrdom, objects they touched. Third-class relics were objects that had touched first-class relics, pieces of cloth pressed against tombs, oil from lamps burning at shrines, dust from holy places. Even these tertiary connections carried power. A special category called brandeia deserves particular attention. These were cloths lowered through openings in tombs to touch the saint's remains, then raised bearing the spiritual imprint of holiness. Rome specialized in producing brandeia from the tombs of martyrs in the catacombs. Pilgrims valued them nearly as highly as actual body parts. The practice reveals something crucial about medieval understandings of sanctity. It was conceived as an almost physical substance that could be transferred through contact, like a holy contagion spreading from the source through material intermediaries. Blood relics occupied a unique position. The blood of Christ, preserved from the crucifixion, was claimed by numerous churches. The theological problems were immense. If Christ rose bodily, how could his blood remain on earth? Elaborate explanations developed, distinguishing between blood shed during the Passion and blood reunited with Christ's body at the resurrection. Similar issues arose with the Virgin Mary, assumed bodily into heaven. Yet churches claimed vials of her milk, teardrops, even hair. Medieval theologians performed impressive intellectual gymnastics to reconcile these claims with doctrine. The authentication of relics was a constant concern and a sophisticated process. Episcopal verification provided the basic seal of approval. When relics were discovered or transferred, bishops conducted formal investigations, witnesses testified to the relic's history, documents tracing custody were examined, but the ultimate authentication came through miracles. A true relic would manifest power through healings, visions, or supernatural events. Conversely, false relics would remain inert or even bring misfortune. This created a self-reinforcing system. Accepted relics attracted pilgrims whose faith might produce psychosomatic healings, which then validated the relic's authenticity. Translation ceremonies, the formal movement of relics, were among the most elaborate rituals of medieval Christianity. These weren't simple transfers, but cosmic events where heaven touched earth. Entire communities participated in processions that could stretch for miles. Bells rang, incense filled the air, hymns echoed across the countryside. The relics often chose their destinations through miraculous signs, becoming too heavy to move past certain points, or healing someone at a particular location, indicating divine approval for a new shrine. These ceremonies reinforced communal identity and marked sacred geography. The invention or discovery of relics followed established narrative patterns. Typically, a saint would appear in a vision to a holy person, often a simple monk or pious layperson, revealing the location of long-lost remains. The visionary would face initial skepticism, requiring multiple appearances and authenticating miracles. Excavation would uncover the relics exactly as described, often accompanied by sweet fragrances, healing lights, or immediate miracles. These discovery narratives served multiple functions. They explained how relics survived persecution, authenticated new finds, and demonstrated continuing divine concern for human affairs. The geography of medieval Europe was shaped by relics and the pilgrimage routes connecting them. Rome, of course, held primacy with the bodies of Peter and Paul and countless martyrs in the catacombs. But every region boasted its sacred sites. Canterbury drew pilgrims to Thomas Becket's tomb after his martyrdom in 1170, becoming England's premier pilgrimage site almost overnight. Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain claimed the body of St. James the Apostle, attracting pilgrims from across Europe along the Camino. Cologne possessed the relics of the Three Kings, the Magi who visited the infant Jesus, making it a major destination for Germanic pilgrims. But the most prestigious pilgrimage remained Jerusalem, where pilgrims could walk in Christ's footsteps and visit the sites of his life, death, and resurrection. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre housed the most sacred relics of all, fragments of the true cross, the stone of anointing, the tomb itself. When Muslim control of Jerusalem restricted Christian access, it helped spark the Crusades. The conquest of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade resulted in a massive transfer of Eastern relics to Western Europe, enriching churches from Venice to Paris with authenticated apostolic remains. Local shrines proliferated across the landscape. Nearly every church possessed some relics required for altar consecrations. Village churches might have only small fragments, but they were cherished nonetheless. Regional saints developed devoted followings. St. Martin's shrine at Tours became so popular that Martin became the most common male name in France. England's St. Cuthbert, whose body remained miraculously incorrupt, drew northerners to Durham. Every locality had its holy protectors, whose relics provided identity and security. The economics of pilgrimage transformed medieval Europe. Major shrines became economic engines, generating revenues that dwarfed many industries. Canterbury's receipts in the decades after Becket's martyrdom funded massive construction projects. The cathedral's accounts show staggering sums. Pilgrims' offerings at Becket's shrine in 1220 totalled £1,142, when a knight's annual income might be £20. These revenues funded not just churches but entire towns. Inns, taverns and shops clustered around shrines. Specialized industries developed. badge making, souvenir production, food services, guided tours. The pilgrim badge industry deserves special attention. These small metal badges, usually depicting the shrine's saint or symbol, served multiple functions. They proved pilgrimage completion, providing social status back home. They were believed to carry protective power, sewn onto clothing or hung in homes. Each major shrine developed distinctive designs: scallop shells for Santiago, ampullae, miniature flasks, containing Canterbury water for Becket, palm branches for Jerusalem. Archaeological finds reveal their massive production. The Thames riverbed has yielded thousands, suggesting how common pilgrimage was across social classes. Competition between shrines could be fierce. When new healing miracles were reported, custodians quickly publicized them to attract pilgrims. Miracle books were compiled, carefully documenting each supernatural event with witnesses' names and details. These weren't credulous accounts, but often skeptical investigations. Shrine keepers knew that exposed frauds would destroy credibility. They distinguished between full healings and improvements, immediate cures and gradual recoveries. Some shrines specialized. Certain saints became known for curing specific ailments, creating medieval medical tourism. The artistic response to relic veneration produced some of medieval Europe's greatest treasures. Reliquaries, containers for relics, became focuses for the finest craftsmanship. Goldsmiths lavished their skills on creating containers worthy of their holy contents. The forms varied enormously. Some reliquaries took the shape of the body part they contained: arm reliquaries for arm bones, head reliquaries for skulls. Others were architectural, resembling miniature churches or castles. The use of rock crystal allowed pilgrims to see the actual relics while protecting them from theft or overzealous devotion. The treasury of Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, built by Louis IX to house his collection of Passion relics, exemplified royal relic patronage. The king paid more for the crown of thorns than for constructing the entire chapel. The building itself became a giant reliquary, its walls of stained glass creating an ethereal space where earthly and heavenly realms merged. Similarly, the Shrine of the Three Kings in Cologne, created by Nicholas of Verdun, represents the apex of medieval goldsmithing, a massive architectural reliquary of gold, silver, enamel and gems that took 40 years to complete. Portable reliquaries allowed sacred power to travel. Processional crosses contained relics in their cores. Pendant reliquaries hung around necks brought protection to their wearers. Travelling altars with embedded relics allowed mass celebration anywhere. During times of crisis, plague, war, drought, relics left their shrines in procession, blessing fields, repelling enemies, or stopping disease. The boundaries between public and private devotion blurred as wealthy individuals assembled personal relic collections, creating domestic sacred spaces. The phenomenon of holy theft, furtum sacrum, reveals the complex medieval attitude toward relics. Stealing relics wasn't always condemned, sometimes it was celebrated. The logic ran thus: saints wanted their relics properly venerated. If relics were neglected, or their shrine was in danger, the saint might arrange their own translation through theft. Venice's acquisition of St. Mark's body from Alexandria became civic mythology. The saint desired to rest in the lagoon city, facilitating his own theft. These narratives legitimized what would otherwise be sacrilege, turning thieves into instruments of divine will. The problem of duplicate relics plagued medieval Christianity. Multiple churches claimed the same unique body parts. Several heads of John the Baptist circulated, leading to jokes even in the Middle Ages. The theological solution was ingenious if unconvincing. God could miraculously multiply relics as Christ multiplied loaves and fishes. More commonly, claims were simply asserted with competing authentications. The proliferation of true cross fragments led the reformer Erasmus to quip that there was enough wood to build a ship. Yet faith persisted, perhaps because the spiritual benefits of pilgrimage mattered more than archaeological accuracy. The forgery industry thrived alongside genuine devotion. Unscrupulous dealers manufactured false relics for profit. Pig bones became martyrs' remains. Ancient Roman graves yielded early Christian saints. Forgers created elaborate authentication documents with fake seals and invented histories. Yet the system had self-correcting mechanisms. Relics that failed to produce miracles lost credibility. Competing shrines investigated rivals' claims. Bishops occasionally exposed frauds, though they had to balance skepticism with maintaining faith in the relic system itself. The Crusades transformed the relic trade. Crusaders returned with Eastern relics authenticated by conquest. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 was particularly significant. Centuries of Byzantine relic collecting suddenly flowed westward. The Sainte-Chapelle's crown of thorns came via Constantinople, Venice's treasury filled with Byzantine sacred artifacts. This massive transfer shifted the geography of sanctity, enriching Western churches while impoverishing Eastern ones. The moral complications troubled some contemporaries. How could holy objects be legitimately acquired through violence? Miracle accounts provide windows into medieval mentalities. The shrine records preserve thousands of stories. The blind seeing, the lame walking, the dead reviving. But beyond spectacular healings, they document ordinary hopes and fears. Parents bringing sick children, merchants praying for safe journeys, women seeking fertility, prisoners promising pilgrimage if released. The miracles weren't always positive. Saints punished those who violated their shrines, struck down perjurers who swore false oaths on relics, and afflicted communities that neglected their cults. This double-edged power made relics both desired and feared. The verification process for miracles was surprisingly rigorous. Shrine keepers interviewed witnesses, recorded names and origins, and sought corroboration. They distinguished between types of miracles: healings, visions, punishments, natural interventions. Some shrines kept medical consultants to examine claimed cures. The miracle books served as evidence for canonization processes and shrine promotion. They also reveal social history: who travelled where, what ailments afflicted medieval people, how communities understood causation and cure. Political dimensions of relic cults were never far from the surface. Royal and noble patronage of shrines demonstrated piety while building legitimacy. The German emperor's control of the Three Kings relics at Cologne reinforced their connection to Christ's kingship. French kings cultivated Saint Denis as their special protector, burying their bodies near his relics. English monarchs promoted national saints, Edward the Confessor, Thomas Becket when convenient, as symbols of divine approval for their rule. Relics travelled to battlefields, sworn upon in treaties, and invoked in coronation rituals. The integration of relics into legal procedures reveals their social function. Oath-taking on relics was the most solemn form of legal commitment. The belief that saints would punish perjurers made relic oaths powerful tools for ensuring truthfulness. Important contracts were sworn over relics. Legal disputes might be settled by ordeal at shrines, letting the saint judge directly. Even touching a reliquary while lying was believed to bring supernatural punishment. This integration of sacred objects into legal proceedings reinforced both religious and social order. Church control over relics was complex and often contested. Bishops claimed authority to authenticate and regulate relics in their dioceses. But monasteries, cathedral chapters, and secular clergy often competed for control of profitable shrines. Revenue-sharing agreements tried to manage conflicts, specifying which group received offerings on which days. Feast day celebrations required careful choreography to balance competing claims. Rome increasingly asserted central authority, especially after the Gregorian reform, but local traditions persisted. The social impact of relic cults extended beyond religion. Pilgrimage created one of the few legitimate reasons for medieval people to travel, exposing them to different cultures, languages, and ideas. Pilgrimage routes became channels for technological and artistic exchange. The Peace of God movement used relics to establish truces and protect non-combatants. Relic processions during disasters created communal solidarity. Patron saints provided civic identity. Venice's St. Mark, Genoa's St. George, Barcelona's St. Eulalia became symbols transcending religious function. Women's relationships with relics were particularly complex. While excluded from priesthood, women could be shrine keepers, visionaries who discovered relics, and authors of miracle collections. Female saints' relics often specialized in women's concerns: childbirth, fertility, domestic violence. Queens and noblewomen assembled impressive relic collections, using them to build networks of sacred power paralleling their husbands' political alliances. Convents became repositories of relics brought by aristocratic nuns, creating female-centered sacred spaces. The sensory experience of relic veneration engaged all faculties. Shrines glittered with gold and gems, catching candlelight in darkened churches. Incense created olfactory associations with holiness. Pilgrims touched reliquaries when permitted, kissed them through protective grills, or pressed objects against them to create contact relics. The taste of water or oil that had touched relics was believed therapeutic. Bells announced miracles. This multisensory engagement made relic veneration a total experience, impressing itself on memory and emotion. The development of elaborate shrine architectures created sacred theatres. The great Gothic cathedrals were essentially monumental reliquaries, their soaring spaces designed to house and honour relics. Ambulatories allowed pilgrims to circulate past shrines without disrupting services. Crypts created intimate spaces for closer contact with saints. The play of light through stained glass, the echo of chants in stone vaults, the progression from darkness to illumination, all orchestrated encounters with the holy that transcended mere viewing. Criticism of relic veneration existed throughout the medieval period, but intensified with new religious movements. Cathars rejected the entire material basis of relic cult. Waldensians questioned the theological justifications. Within Orthodox Christianity, voices like Guibert of Nogent raised concerns about authentication and proper devotion. He didn't reject relics but demanded higher standards of verification and criticized superstitious practices. These internal critiques prepared ground for later Protestant rejection, while showing that medieval Christianity wasn't monolithically credulous. The economic critique of pilgrimage grew alongside religious concerns. Moralists condemned the mixing of devotion with commerce, the transformation of holy journeys into profit-making enterprises. The wealth accumulated at shrines while the poor suffered seemed to violate Christian principles. Some argued that money spent on pilgrimage could better serve charity at home. Yet the economic benefits were undeniable. Entire regions prospered from pilgrimage trade, creating employment and circulation of wealth that pure charity couldn't match. The Protestant Reformation brought systematic assault on relic veneration. Reformers condemned it as idolatry, superstition, and clerical fraud. Luther mocked the multiplication of relics. Calvin wrote treatises exposing frauds, and Reformed theologians developed sophisticated arguments against the theological basis of relic cult. The stripping of shrines in Protestant territories was both theological statement and economic revolution. Vast wealth locked in reliquaries was liquidated. Pilgrimage routes withered. Communities lost both spiritual focuses and economic resources. The Catholic Counter-Reformation responded not by abandoning relics but by reforming their cult. The Council of Trent reaffirmed relic veneration while demanding better authentication and condemning abuses. New procedures for verifying relics were established. The Roman Sacred Congregation of Rites centralized control. Baroque reliquaries emphasized theatrical display while maintaining clearer distinctions between container and contents. The catacomb discoveries in Rome provided fresh supplies of authenticated early Christian relics, reinvigorating the cult while meeting Reformed standards. Enlightenment criticism took different forms than Protestant rejection. Philosopher mocked relic veneration as primitive superstition incompatible with reason. They collected stories of frauds and competing claims, presenting them as evidence of clerical deception and popular ignorance. Yet, Enlightenment thinkers also recognized relics' social functions. Voltaire noted how pilgrimage promoted commerce and cultural exchange. The tension between rationalist critique and historical appreciation would characterize modern approaches to medieval relic cult. Archaeological investigation of relics began in the 19th century, applying scientific methods to test ancient claims. Some investigations confirmed traditions. The bones venerated as certain saints proved to be from the correct period and showed signs consistent with recorded martyrdoms. Others exposed centuries of error or fraud. Carbon dating, DNA analysis, and forensic techniques now allow unprecedented verification. Yet these scientific findings rarely affect devotion. Faith operates in different registers than archaeological evidence. The modern Catholic Church maintains nuanced positions on relics. Veneration continues, but with careful distinctions between worship due to God alone and honour given to saints. Authentication procedures combine traditional documentation with scientific analysis. New relics, from recently canonized saints, follow strict protocols for distribution and veneration. The emphasis has shifted from miraculous claims to spiritual inspiration, from physical healing to moral example. Yet millions still visit traditional shrines, seeking what medieval pilgrims sought: contact with the holy. Contemporary scholarship on medieval relics has moved beyond simple condemnation or credulous acceptance. Anthropological approaches explore how relics functioned in creating community identity and managing social tensions. Economic historians calculate the massive wealth transfers pilgrimage enabled. Art historians recognize reliquaries as crucial for understanding medieval aesthetics. Literary scholars analyze hagiographies and miracle collections as complex texts negotiating between tradition and innovation. The relic cult emerges not as primitive superstition, but as a sophisticated system addressing perennial human needs. What can we learn from medieval relic veneration? First, it reminds us that humans need tangible connections to the transcendent. Abstract theology satisfies few. Most seek concrete encounters with the holy. Second, it shows how religious practices interweave with economic, social, and political systems in complex ways. Shrines were never just about prayer, but about community, commerce, and power. Third, it demonstrates human creativity in bridging the gap between ideal and real, using material objects to access immaterial realities. The medieval relic cult also warns about the dangers of commodifying the sacred. When holy objects become profit centers, when miracles become marketing tools, when devotion becomes indistinguishable from commerce, corruption follows. The tension between sincere faith and institutional exploitation runs through the entire history of relic veneration, yet condemning the abuses shouldn't blind us to the genuine devotion and real benefits many experience through pilgrimage and shrine visitation. As you finish your tea and reflect on this journey through medieval sacred geography, consider what serves as relics in our secular age. What objects do we invest with meanings beyond their material reality? What places do we journey to seeking transformation? The forms change, but the impulse remains, to find in physical things windows to transcendent meaning. Medieval Christians did this through bones and blood, creating a sacred landscape we can still trace across Europe's churches and museums. The golden reliquaries still gleam in cathedral treasuries, though few now believe in their miraculous powers. The pilgrimage routes still exist, walked now often for cultural rather than religious reasons. The miracle stories survive in manuscript collections, testifying to hopes and fears remarkably similar to our own. In studying medieval relics, we encounter not primitive others but fellow humans, grappling with ultimate questions through material means. Their solutions no longer work for most, but their questions remain ours. How to connect earth and heaven, how to find healing and meaning, how to build communities around shared sacred values. The bones may be silent now, but they still have much to teach about the enduring human quest for contact with something beyond ourselves.